While I covered the major things that caused me to leave Christianity, there are also several minor things, and one of those was becoming a mom. I remember my parents talking about how they knew my brother and I were depraved, sinful beings from the moment that we were born.
I'm telling you, that baby is evil!
The selfishness was evident, they said, in how we cried and demanded things. Becoming a parent really made me reanalyze these things. How could a tiny creature who didn't even ask to come in this world be selfish for using the only thing that it knows how to do, which is cry, to ask for food in order to survive? How the hell is that selfish?
Selfish children.
I also had a major problem teaching my kids about the Bible and God. Our oldest child attended church and Sunday school and everything, but I found it hard to sit down and talk to him about an invisible being that was watching him from above and would send him to hell if he didn't accept him into his heart. I found that really hard to implement into his brain and indoctrinate into him, because when I looked at my son, I just saw an energetic, joyful child who wanted to run around and play. And I wanted my kids to just be kids. I wanted to give them that opportunity to just freely play without worrying about what an invisible being would think about what they're doing and say, oh, that's sinful. Oh, you can't do that. That sends you to hell. That thing that you did when you were 2 years old, crying for something, having a tantrum, that sends you to hell. I didn't want to implement that into my kids as they were growing up. And now I have 2 kids who are past the age of when I accepted Christ in my heart, and I cannot fathom how someone at the age of 4 could understand enough to accept Christ into their heart, which just makes me wonder just how much my parents indoctrinated me since birth to believe that I was depraved, horrible, sinful creature, so that at the age of 4, I was sobbing, asking for Christ into my heart because I was so sinful and so bad. The level of indoctrination that had to have happened for that to occur is just unfathomable to me.
This is unfathomable.
And my parents were older than I was when they had me. Their frontal lobes were fully developed, and they were fully cognizant of their decisions. There is no excuse for them when they looked at their babies cry for food and for nourishment and for help, and they determined that that was sinful. There's no excuse for that. I honestly cannot comprehend that as a parent myself. And I believed in sinfulness from birth until my kids showed me something completely different. The innocence that was robbed of me as a child. As a fundamentalist Christian, I believe that homosexuality was a sin and that it was something that people struggled with, but that they could overcome. You know the common saying, love the sinner but hate the sin. That was me. I fully believed that. However, I started to question things a bit when one of my students came to me and confided in me that they were trans. Now, this is something that's not very common in a very conservative country like Guatemala, and it is very frowned upon. And so when they told me that they were trans, I was absolutely shocked. And my first thought was, oh, well, I can use this opportunity to share the love of Christ with them and help them come to their true identity in Christ. And so I invited my student out to get some coffee, and we started to talk about the Bible and God and everything. And he honestly surprised me. He was very aware of the Bible. He explained to me how he believed in God, but that he felt freer as a man and that this was his true identity, and he felt better this way. And the way he explained things to me made me realize that he wasn't confused, as a lot of Christians would say, oh, they're just confused, this is a phase, whatever excuse they give. That was not what I saw in my friend. I saw someone who had really thought this through, someone who was very brave in coming out in an environment that is 100% against it. And I saw someone who was very solidly comfortable in who they were. And in that moment, I had hoped that God would work in his heart. Of course, nothing changed in his heart, but it did in mine. And I started questioning why I felt the need to change people, why I felt the need to help someone discover a new identity. Why does he need to change? He's not hurting anyone. Quite the contrary. He's the life of the class. And my husband and I are still friends with him today. And he's still a joy to be around. Who am I to say who he needs to be? Why do I feel this need to change other people? And honestly, what business is it of mine?
None of your business.
I don't want to get into too much of the question of morality in this video because it is very complex and it deserves a whole video of its own. But this was one of the core ideas that kept echoing my head throughout my time as a missionary and during deconstruction. If you remember back to the bite model that I shared, one of the points was black and white thinking, and I had textbook black and white thinking. There was right and there was wrong. There was no in between. For example, I thought there was never an excuse to lie and that there was never a reason for violence, which looking back now is very ironic given the God of the Old Testament and the violence that happened in the Old Testament. But that was what I believed. No excuse for any sin. There is right and there is wrong. I even took this to the extreme of thinking that if I had to let someone kill me so that I could share the love of Christ with them, I would. For me, things were as black and white as they could be. Until I lived a few years in Guatemala. Many smaller, more rural villages have developed their own vigilante groups to protect the people there because the police just don't answer the calls. They don't come. I would regularly walk by signs that would say, "Thieves will be lynched and burned," and that was commonplace. And at first, I thought this was completely ridiculous. This is wrong. This isn't fair. But then I experienced it for myself. We lived in a very small town, and there was a alleyway that was very poorly lit, and it was the only alleyway connecting where we lived to where the bus stop was, and I had to walk that path every day to get to the bus. And unfortunately, 2 people from another town came in and sexually assaulted 2 women on that road. And the response from the town was very interesting, and it was admirable, to be honest. All of the men got together, armed of course, and stood watch every single night to catch the guys that did that to their people. And as a woman in the community, as a woman who walked that path every day, I was incredibly grateful for the safety that they offered me and for the fact that they would be willing to protect their own. This really created a conundrum for me. If I was so against violence in any form, how could I be grateful for people who would kill these 2 men to protect me? How am I okay with that? If there is never an excuse for violence, why do I feel that this is okay? Why am I grateful for this? I would have 100% preferred a rapist die than let them hurt more people. And especially in an area where there's no police, there's no established justice system, what other option do you have? And ultimately in that time, I settled on the idea that this is okay, but I personally cannot participate. But simply realizing that killing and violence in some circumstances is morally okay because it protects other people, it protects the greater good, really shook my foundational beliefs. I kept returning to the 10 Commandments and their black and white way of explaining things, and I kept trying to consolidate what the Bible said with what I was living in my everyday life. It took me years to process this moral conflict in my heart, but I ultimately rejected moral absolutism because of this situation, and of course others that followed. And by rejecting moral absolutism, I had to reject parts of the Bible like the 10 Commandments. While on the mission field, I worked at a language center to help pay the bills, and I had a boss and friend there, and she taught me a core part of who I am now, and that was you do you. She let students express themselves how they preferred. She recognized different teachers' needs and adapted to them, and anytime I asked her how to do specific minor things, she just said, you do you. Now, this may seem like common sense, but it wasn't to me. I grew up in and worked in an extremely rigid, obedience-focused environment. And the idea of individuality, the idea of me doing things without reporting to a superior was completely foreign to me. And again, being a parent has made me embrace this idea of you do you even more. The more I see my kids grow, the more I realize how different they are and how individual they are. And I want them to explore that. I want them to discover who they are. And that has become my motto. You do you. It's not what I want. It's not what I liked growing up. What do you want? You do you. And in Christianity, this whole idea of you do you doesn't exist because you have to die to self and let Christ live through you. And in fact, when I left Christianity, I started this whole long discovery of who I really am. And I'm still on that journey of discovering what I actually like, what things I just avoided because they were demonic or satanic and things like that. But this is this whole long journey of self-discovery because I'm letting myself do things that I like. I'm letting myself discover who I am outside of religion. So that's my story, guys. Thanks for listening to it. And if you made it to the end, congrats. Make sure to hit that subscribe button so you get news about my upcoming videos. I will try to post every week if I can, if not every other week, about apologetics, Christianity in public schools, Christian books, anything that piques my interest. So subscribe so you can hear about upcoming videos from me. So until then, question everything.